We're continuing our battle mechanics series here on the channel. Now, yesterday we covered in depth the damage formula calculations, what's happening behind the scenes when one Pokemon attacks into another Pokemon for the game to determine how much damage each of those attacking moves does. Now, the damage formula is an important foundation for understanding some of these more advanced topics that we're going to be discussing throughout the Battle Mechanics series. So if you've not checked out the video about how damage is calculated in Pokemon Go, I'll put a link up to that video here. Be sure to check that out. It's going to be foundational information that we're going to need to understand some of these later concepts. Now in this video, we're going to be going in depth into all of the damage modifiers and multipliers that affect damage output. Things like the same type attack bonus, friendship bonus, weather boost. As I mentioned in yesterday's video, the multipliers for damage are a broad topic that make up their own video, and this is that video. Let's get into it. Welcome back to the channel, trainers. My name is Oro Chris. I am your catching coach. If you are new to the channel, welcome. We do appreciate you stopping out. If you are interested in Pokemon Go, competitive PvP, and basically anything Pokemon related, consider subscribing. Now, as far as damage multipliers are concerned, there are some multipliers that are only active during PvE content, things like raiding or in gym attacking. There are some damage modifiers that are only active during PvP and trainer battles, and those are the attack boosting and debuffing moves, things like Night Slash and Power Up Punch. And then there are some attack bonuses that are active for both PvE and PvP. So I'll be sure as I'm going along and discussing each of these particular multipliers when they're actually active, whether it's PvE, PvP, or both. Now we'll start with the damage bonuses and multipliers that are only active during PvE. That's raiding and in gym attacking. The first is weather bonus. There's a bonus to certain types of attacks of Pokemon during particular types of weather. And the weather bonus is a 20% boost to damage output, which means that a move that would be doing 50 damage as a base would now be doing 60 damage. And as we can see here in the infographic, each particular type of weather reflects a different boost to certain types of moves. For example, clear and sunny weather has fire, grass, and ground type moves receiving that 10% boost to damage output. If you can ever find it, foggy weather will boost dark and ghost types. Now it's easy to tell what types of moves are boosted in what weather because in-game when you click on the icon for the weather, it will show you what particular types of Pokemon are boosted during that weather, as well as what types of Pokemon attacks are being boosted during that period. The other attack bonus that is only active during PvE and raiding and in gym attacking is friendship bonus. Whenever you and a trainer that you are friends with in-game attack into the same Pokemon, whether that's in a gym attack or in raiding, you'll get a bonus to your damage output. And depending on the level of your friendship with that trainer, the boost of that attack continues to go up. For good friends, it's 3%. For great friends, 5%. Ultra friends, 7% increase. And best friends, you get a 10% increase on damage output in PvE. Now, I should mention, these varying levels of friendship bonuses do not stack, meaning whatever the highest level of friendship is present in the particular raid, that is the amount of damage that's going to be boosted for all participants in the raid battle. So if you've got one pair of trainers that have a level of friendship at best friends, then you'll be seeing that 10% increase to damage. You don't then get an additional 7% if you have an ultra friend in the raid and 5% for great friends and so on. So it's only going to be the highest level of friendship that ultimately is applied, but the higher the friendship, the better the boost you'll be getting. Now the following damage multipliers are active in both PvE as well as PvP. So this is across all aspects of battle mechanics within the game. The first is the same type attack bonus. For short, you'll often hear that called stab. Now the same type attack bonus is a 20% increase to the damage output when a Pokemon of a particular type uses a move of the same type as that Pokemon. For example, when Mewtwo, a psychic type Pokemon, uses a psychic type attack like Psystrike, there's a 20% increase to the damage output for that Psystrike because Mewtwo is a psychic type Pokemon using a psychic type move. Next, and probably the most important multiplier that you need to be aware of, this is the one that if you're going to memorize how these multipliers function, this is the set that I would spend a lot of your study time with. And that is the effectiveness of particular moves. When we're talking about effectiveness of a move, we're talking about type effectiveness in certain matchups. And when a Pokemon is weak to a particular type of move, for example, when a fire type is weak to water type attacks, the water type attack is therefore called super effective. The super effective bonus in Pokemon Go is 1.6 times damage. So you get a 60% boost to your damage output for using a super effective move in battle. But because some Pokemon are dual type Pokemon, for example, Magcargo, a fire type Pokemon, is also a rock type Pokemon, and rock type Pokemon are weak also to water type attacks. So when a Pokemon uses a water type attack into a Pokemon like Magcargo that's 2 times weak to water, it doesn't do just 60% more damage. You take that first multiplier for the fire weakness, 1.6, and you multiply that by another 1.6 to compensate or to account for the rock typing, and now you're doing 2.56 times the amount of damage that you would otherwise be doing if you were hitting for neutral damage. And this double super effectiveness has sometimes resulted in folks misspeaking with regard to what that bonus actually represents. Super effectiveness in the main series games was calculated or represented a 100% increase to damage. So you would be doing 2 times as much damage if you were hitting for super effective, and if you were doubly super effective, if the Pokemon was like Dragonite and doubly weak to ice type attacks, now you'd be hitting for 4 times damage. So oftentimes you'll hear Pokemon YouTubers and others say that Swampert is 4 times weak to grass. In the main series games, that's completely an accurate statement. But in Pokemon Go, they're not 4 times weak to grass. They're double super effective, that you can say that they are 2 times weak to grass, but that's represented by a 1.6 times a 1.6, which equals 2.56 times damage. It's still a huge increase. A Swampert doesn't want to see a grass type, but 256% increase in damage is not the same quite as 400% increase in damage. So as we can see, super effectiveness and double super effectiveness is a huge sway in damage output in particular matchups. So that is super effectiveness. What about the opposite? What about not very effective? What about those resistances? When a move is not very effective, it's mathematically the inverse of that 1.6 times multiplier, which ends up working out to be 0.625 times as much damage. So if you have a Pokemon like Gyarados, for example, that as a water type would be weak to grass type attacks, and as a flying type would be resisting grass type attacks, the 1.6 on this side and the 0.625 on this side negating damage result in a grass type attack into a Pokemon like Gyarados only hitting for neutral damage. So that's one layer of not very effective. In the main series games, there was something called immunity. In immunity situations, Pokemon like a ground type Pokemon would be immune to electric type attacks. Ghost type Pokemon would be immune to normal type attacks and fighting type attacks. Dark type Pokemon would be immune to psychic type attacks. But in the main series games, that meant that they did no damage. That has not been translated the same way in Pokemon Go. In Pokemon Go, we have what you could call immunity tier resistance. We still have dark type Pokemon that are not taking very much damage from psychic type attacks, but they are taking some damage. And that some damage is represented by 0.625 times damage because of the one layer of not very effectiveness, and then multiplying that by another 0.625 times as much damage to represent the second layer of not very effective damage. And as a result, when you have a situation where a Pokemon has immunity tier resistance in Pokemon Go, that equates to that Pokemon taking about 40% as much damage as would otherwise be happening in a neutral situation. Now, what about dual type Pokemon? There are certain circumstances, as we just mentioned, where a ghost type Pokemon like Gengar, as a ghost type, has immunity tier resistance because of its ghost typing from fighting type attacks. But Gengar is also a poison type Pokemon. And poison, in and of itself, has one layer of not very effectiveness, one layer of resistance for fighting type moves. So now we've got ghost types with 2 layers of not very effective, immunity tier resistance for the ghost type, and then we have 1 layer of not very effectiveness for the poison type. And you put those 2 and 1 together, and now we've got 3 times resistances for Gengar against fighting type moves. So doing that math, you take 0.625 times as much damage times 0.625 times 0.625 times damage. And after those 3 layers of not very effectiveness are added together or multiplied together, and that results in a Pokemon like Gengar taking only 24% as much damage as a Pokemon would otherwise be taking in a neutral situation. So we've got double super effective, not very effective, immunity tier resistance, 2 layers of not very effective, and then we'll call it immunity plus 3 layers of not very effective in circumstances where one dual type is immunity tier resistance to a particular type of move, and then that secondary type also has a layer of not very effectiveness for that same type of move. So when you can put those things together, you can come up with a circumstance where you're now hitting for tremendous amounts of damage and also resisting tremendous amounts of damage, which is why a Pokemon, for example, like Haunter, loves to see a fighting type Pokemon that has a psychic subtyping. Now, hoping not for some psychic attacks on top, but Gengar or Haunter would be hitting for super effective damage into the psychic type Pokemon on the other side of the field, but they would be taking 3 times not very effective damage from the fighting type moves that fighting type Pokemon might otherwise be using. Now you can see just how much you can swing certain matchups by having both super effective damage available as well as resistances to particular moves. And this is particularly important in situations like battles with Giovanni, as well as the other Team Go Rocket leaders. In those circumstances, those shadow bonus Pokemon, they are dishing out tons of damage. And it's almost more important to not be worried about, am I hitting for super effective damage into those shadow Pokemon, but am I resisting, double resisting, or 3 times resisting the potential moves that those Pokemon might be using? Because ultimately, you want to be lasting long enough to get to your charge moves and dish out enough damage to ultimately swing the matchup. Now, beautiful segue here. The next bonus that we need to discuss is the Shadow bonus. Now, Shadow Pokemon recently, I don't know what they were thinking when they did it, but Niantic did produce a situation where Shadow Pokemon now have tremendous bonuses to their attack stat, a 20% boost to attacking power because of that Shadow bonus. But there's no such thing as a free lunch. The inverse is also true. It works out to be the math is 5/6 of their defenses are reduced. So these Pokemon, Shadow Pokemon, have a roughly 17% reduction in their defenses to compensate for that 20% boost in damage output. But that damage output, a 20% boost, especially in PvE content and raids, a 20% boost to damage is a huge sway in the overall rankings for damage per second. Now, because of how the damage formula ultimately functions, that 20% reduction or increase in the attack, or 17% decrease in the defenses for those particular Pokemon, it functions the same as if that 20% were being affected by the multipliers in the formula. So we don't need to really worry too much about whether or not we're saying that this is a 20% boost to the attack or to the attack stat. It all ends up evening out. And that represents all of the potential damage multipliers as they relate to the damage formula and damage calculation in Pokemon Go. Now, putting this all together, think about how you can potentially stack each of these multipliers to create the best possible damage outcome in a particular matchup. If you've got a sunny day, you're going up against Heatran. You've got Groudon as your potential Pokemon. Heatran's going to be 2 times weak to ground type attacks, so you're going to have 256% increase on damage, times the stab bonus 1.2 times, so another 20% boost on top of that 256, times, if it's a sunny day, you're going to have ground types getting that weather boost, another 20% boost to damage. And if you're in the raid with a best friend, that's another 10% boost to damage. So you put all of those bonuses together, and you're now looking at 406% increase in your total damage output by stacking double super effective, weather bonus, stab, and the best friend bonus. And each of those multipliers then stacking one on top of the other, that's how you can create the most synergistic outcome in terms of battle performance in Pokemon Go. I took the liberty of creating a spreadsheet. I've got a link to it in the description down below. It's a Google sheet that lays out all of the potential damage multipliers in Pokemon Go, as well as the damage modifying moves, how they are ultimately affected. So as you can see, Understanding the ins and outs of damage multipliers in Pokemon Go is incredibly important, especially type effectiveness. If you're interested in a homework assignment, I would definitely spend a lot of time mastering the ins and outs of type effectiveness, knowing what types of Pokemon resist what types of moves, and what types of attacks are super effective into what particular matchups. For example, Gyarados, as a water-type Pokemon, you would think would be weak to grass-type attacks, but because it's also a dual-type Pokemon, it is a flying type. Flying types resist grass-type attacks, so those two things negate each other. Knowing those types of ins and outs and the nuances of type effectiveness is incredibly important, especially in the fast-paced battling of Go Battle League and in trainer battles. Now, the damage modifying moves, things like Power Up Punch and Night Slash, they function a little bit differently than the damage multipliers we've been discussing throughout the course of this video. So we're going to be discussing the damage modifying moves in PvP in a later video. Keep your eyes out for that. If you are interested in this type of battle mechanics content, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so that you don't miss when those later videos come out. But thank you for sticking around until the end of the video, and until next time, happy catching.